Bizarre historical facts that are actually true.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Talltanic. I'm your host, Alexa. Today, I have all of the most bizarre facts my research team has found along the way. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so that you never miss an upload. Before we get into today's video, let's see if anyone watching can guess how tall I am. I know, it's hard to tell on camera, but write your guesses in the comments down below and see if you're right later.
Dentist wedding gift. Dentistry is a modern marvel, but in 19th century England, going to the dentist was a nightmare ordeal. The dentist is a loose term, as most procedures, an equally loose term, were performed by the neighborhood barber. So it became tradition for well-to-do families to give their bride-to-be daughter the ultimate wedding gift. Not a voucher for a day at the spa, but full teeth removal. This gummy gift was considered the most thoughtful as it spared the bride the horror of dentistry. She could just do it in one fell swoop instead of plucking them out one by one. Luckily, the gift voucher often included dentures, so the wedding pics came out okay. Toffee Tsunami. In 1919, Boston was engulfed in a tsunami, one that has never been seen before. The waves reached 15 feet, reached speeds of 35 miles an hour, and demolished buildings and vehicles and cost lives of animals and humans in its path. The unbelievable thing is that the tsunami wave was a wall of hot molasses. This sweet mess was the result of an explosion of a 90-foot wide iron tank containing 2.5 million gallons of crude molasses. The offending sticky wave of destruction was the property of the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, who had it stored for rum manufacturing. The cleanup took 2 weeks, and for decades the sweet smell of molasses lingered in the air in hot weather. Real Reagan. Ronald Reagan can be considered one of the most colorful presidents, well, perhaps until the current POTUS. Reagan's interesting career included film acting before he turned his sights on the presidency. But even before that, he was an experienced lifeguard with 77 rescues under his belt. Some people stand in the darkness, afraid to come into the light, but not Reagan. Flycatchers. In ancient Egypt, servants had it bad. As if hauling giant stones to build pyramids wasn't bad enough, they were called on to constantly fan royalty in the desert heat. As if they hadn't endured enough then, they were lathered in honey to attract flies to themselves, so the flies wouldn't land on the pharaoh. The Great French Mustache Strike. Believe it or not, the mustache was a mark of pride and privilege in turn-of-the-century France. The French upper class deprived those in employment that they deemed menial from sporting a mustache. These stashless servants staged a protest in 1907 by going on strike to demand higher wages, fewer working hours, and the privilege of growing a mustache. The strike held the country captive and finally broke after 2 weeks, and the strikers won the right to rock a mustache. 9-year-old author. At 9 years old, Daisy Ashford wrote a book called The Young Visitors. The year was 1890, and upon completion, the book was swept under a rug, or rather popped in an attic. 28 years went by, and Daisy and her sisters found it again when cleaning up their late mother's house. The manuscript was passed from person to person until it made it onto the desk of a publisher who promptly sent it to print in 1919, with a preface by J.M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan. Many people thought that Barrie himself was the author. The book was a hit and got great reviews for its literary excellence. No Man Left Behind.
Liechtenstein sent out an army of 80 men in the Austro-Prussian War in 1866. They returned home with 81 men. Apparently, they'd made a friend along the way and brought him back. Who goes to war to make a friend? Liechtenstein, that's who. And they haven't gone to war since.
Potato sack fashion. The Great Depression in the US hit the population hard, but the potato industry helped lift the burden slightly. Poverty forced many people to make clothes from potato sacks, so the potato distributors made their sacks more colorful to help boost the fashion appeal of the clothes. Animal or criminal. No one was above the law in the medieval ages, and animals were often put on trial with little or no defense, and they were often sentenced to death. It's a little similar now, only we skip the law part and go straight to the barbecue. Wartime. The war between England and Zanzibar is the shortest recorded war in history. It lasted 38 minutes, and that's the short and long of it. Forever leaning. Did you know that the Leaning Tower of Pisa always leaned? It was never upright, as the foundation resided on unstable soil as soon as construction started on the second floor. Lucky in life rafts? Violet Jessup should have bought lottery tickets, as Lady Luck was certainly on her side. Violet survived 3 shipwrecks in her life. First, she was on the RMS Olympic when it collided with the HMS Hawk. Then, she made it safely onto a life raft when the RMS Titanic sunk in 1912. And last, she survived the sinking of the HMHS Britannic when it was sunk in World War I. Einstein for president. In 1952, the president of Israel died. The prime minister at the time asked Albert Einstein to be their country's president. Einstein graciously declined the offer, stating that, quote-unquote, he lacked the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people. I guess it's all relative. Human-Z. Science in the 1920s might surprise you with its advances in genetics. That year, Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov successfully used artificial insemination to create a human-chimpanzee hybrid. The name for the hybrid is still up for discussion, but what about human-Z, chuman, or manpanzee? Caged lobster. A cruel and unacceptable punishment in prisons in the 1800s was feeding prisoners lobster. Bad blood. The 1796 season in sword making was a dark mark on the British military. The sword issued was so poorly made, it was little more than an ornament. Firstly, it was really bad at cutting, and it bounced off of bare flesh, which was a pretty mandatory need of a sword. Then it had no strength and was too flexible when thrusting and would bend back in on itself. Then the hand grip was ill-suited for combat, and a soldier's hand would get crushed when it buckled. Sadly, the British headed to the Napoleonic Wars with these swords. Let's just say, in this case, the pen was mightier than the sword. King cards. In a deck of cards, the 4 kings actually represent real kings from history. Most people agree that they are meant to represent Charlemagne as the King of Hearts, either Augustus or Julius Caesar as the King of Diamonds, King David of Israel as the King of Spades, and Alexander the Great as the King of Clubs. Drive-by. On August 17, 1896, the first pedestrian was killed by a car. The passing away of Mrs. Bridget Driscoll was due to being hit by Arthur Edsel, driving at 4 miles an hour. The King of Pickpockets. King Farouk was the king of Egypt from 1936 to 1952, and he reigned with some weird and intriguing habits. One of the strange habits he had was being a kleptomaniac who picked pockets of dignitaries he met with. During World War II, during dinner with Winston Churchill, he lifted Churchill's pocket watch. It was a bad move, as it was a family heirloom from Queen Anne to his ancestor John Churchill. After an outcry about the loss, Farouk handed it over, claiming he found it. Awkward. It's in the air. The miasma theory was the belief that bad-smelling air was infected with diseases and was the root cause of illness. Doctors wore plague masks that made them look like crows with long, hollow noses. These hollows were actually filled with flowers and other fragrances to fight off diseased air. Ancient history.
Did you know that George Washington died before dinosaurs were discovered? It's true. Washington passed in 1799, but the first dinosaur wasn't discovered until 1824 by William Buckland.
Tootsie Rolls saved the U.S. Army. U.S. troops were cornered during the Korean War. They were outnumbered 8-1. It was minus 25 degrees, supplies were running low, and they couldn't warm up their food enough to defrost it. They were low on mortar shells, so in communicating, they used the code word for these mortar shells: Tootsie Rolls. But someone receiving the message must have been out of the loop, because they literally airdropped a load of Tootsie Roll candies instead. The Tootsie Rolls proved a perfect supply though, as they were like a really good energy boost, and when chewed and softened, could be used as putty to patch bullet holes in equipment. With this new sugar rush, the American forces broke out of the reservoir and battled themselves to safety. You wear them well. Pants were invented somewhere between the 13th and 10th centuries BC in Central Asia by horse-riding nomadic herders. Turns out the fashion-forward nomads were weaving their wool trousers with a straight, fitted leg and strings to tighten at the waist. Sounds like a classic first fashion to us.
Those are a lot of weird facts so far, and we still have one more to go, but I think I owe you a fact about me first. It's hard to tell on camera, but I'm actually 5'11". I know, weird, right?
1. Hunting season. Napoleon asked for a rabbit hunt to be set up for him. So, his chief of staff had 3,000 rabbits captured to be released for the hunt. Upon their release, the rabbits very uncharacteristically hightailed directly for Napoleon and his hunting party. Just imagine hundreds of bunnies swarming the world's most powerful man. I guess the whole thing was a harebrained idea in the first place.